Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Carolyn McLeod, your moderator for the webinar on license server redundancy and failover in BarTender 2021. Even though we say this is for enterprises, some of what we're talking about here may be of interest to all size businesses. So let us know what you think afterwards. In the follow-up email after the event, you'll receive a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck and the technical document on the subject that we're talking about today. And everyone who registers will get a copy of that. So if for some reason you have to leave early or you're having trouble hearing us, rest assured you'll get a copy of the presentation. So again, thank you for joining us. As we go through the content today, please be sure and type your questions into the question panel of the dashboard. If we don't get to them during the session, we'll definitely get to them after. We'll follow up with you to make sure you get your questions answered. So take advantage of our time here today and just let us know as things come across your mind. Our presenters today are Peter Hernandez, Senior Sales Engineer, and Dennis Shea, Senior Sales Engineer for the APAC region. And I think we're all set. Peter, if you want to take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great. Alrighty, so as Carolyn mentioned, the topic for today's webinar is license server redundancy and failover, which Siegel Scientific is highly enhanced with the latest version of BarTender 2021, to provide continuity of production printing by adding in redundancy and failover options for your BarTender license servers. And with regards to the agenda for today's webinar, it is to review the license server redundancy and failover options available to customers of BarTender 2021. Specifically, we will be looking at how redundancy and failover for licensing can be configured and managed in support of a high availability environment. We'll then review the process of creating a triad and backup relationship in BarTender's administration console application. These are the two new redundancy options available to you in BarTender 2021. And as Carolyn mentioned, at the end of this webinar, we'll leave some time to field some questions. Let's all start with a baseline understanding of the Siegel license server and its primary function. Siegel license server is used by BarTender software to host an activated software license and to keep track of printer usage by the BarTender print clients. It hosts the license by way of activating a product key code that you purchase in the BarTender software along with Siegel Scientific's activation server. The license defines the addition of BarTender in use, number of printers that BarTenders can print to during a continuous 7-day period. Once BarTender is installed, the licensing section of Administration Console provides administrators with the tools to keep track of printer usage as BarTender clients initiate print jobs. So why is the topic of redundancy and failover important for software applications like BarTender? A high-level objective of any software package and consumer of software packages is to provide the user with a seamless experience without interruption or failure, basically allowing for business operations to continue without any disruption. So high availability refers to the ability of software and system users to access the services and resources without interruption. If a user can't access the system at any time, it is quote unquote unavailable. Systems being unavailable can certainly disrupt business operations. In making software packages highly available, there's 3 primary objectives. Number 1, elimination of a single point of failure, adding or building redundant systems so that failure of a component doesn't disrupt business operations from continuing. 2, having a reliable crossover to an available system in the event of a failure. A reliable system should have as seamless a crossover as possible. Again, so as not to disrupt business operations from continuing. And 3, having the ability to detect failures as they occur. If we can eliminate a single point of failure and reliably cross over to a redundant system, then users may never see a failure and be able to continue with their business activities as usual. So in the context of license server for BarTender, the redundancy takes the form of additional license servers that respond to BarTender clients, while failover is the process of how the redundancy switchover takes effect. So why is this needed for the BarTender license server? Well, printer-based licensing is a key aspect of BarTender. If network unreliability or hardware failure makes connections from your BarTender clients to the hosted license server unpredictable or even fail, then it puts in jeopardy the entire label printing solution and ultimately the customer's business operations. Many customers with mission-critical labeling requirements demand high availability from their BarTender software. For example, without a barcode or RFID label being applied to a product or box, a production line could stop, goods cannot be shipped, resulting basically in a cascade of upstream and downstream processes negatively impacting your entire business processes. Therefore, it's vital that the labeling solution is robust and dependable across all of its functions, including licensing. In choosing a suitable redundancy and failover mode for licensing server, a customer can leverage the tools BarTender has to offer in making the license server highly available to its users. So a little history of our license redundancy capabilities. The redundancy and failover options for licensing has evolved over time. So for those customers on the webinar who have older versions, it may be valuable for you to compare your current options to what's available in the newer version. So with BarTender 2016 and earlier, BarTender offered 2 redundancy options. The first being the built-in 72-hour grace period for the BarTender client should a license server not be found by that client. And the second is that of an alternate license server. The alternate license server is basically a second instance of license server running on a different computer, which has been activated with an additional paid-for license. The user would configure the BarTender client with the address of both the primary and the alternate license server. This was a client-side configuration which was not able to be centrally managed. For this configuration, the license for each license server in terms of edition, version, and number of printers supported would need to be identical. So with the release of BarTender 2019, we continue to support the 72-hour grace period as before, but we removed the client-based provision of an alternate license server. The license server model was basically completely re-engineered with new and improved printer-based license management functionality, better performance, better security, as well as remote central management. Also, multiple license servers can be hosted and partitioned on a single license server as of BarTender 2019. Now with BarTender 2021, automated license server redundancy comes back, taking advantage of the new service-oriented architecture that was introduced with the redesign of BarTender 2019 licensing model. The new redundancy modes include 1, offering a backup or alternate license server where the license is permitted to be asymmetrical in size, with the 2 systems being able to communicate bidirectionally. Or number 2, the ability to define a license server, what we call Triad, for built-in robustness from just a single license. And of course, the 72-hour grace period in the BarTender clients remains pretty much as before. So as mentioned, there are 2 different relationship types you can leverage with BarTender 2021. 1, the Triad relationship can be achieved with 1 licensed product key code. The backup relationship, can be achieved with 2 licensed product key codes. So a Triad server relationship requires 3 physical servers, each running a licensed server, but together they behave as a single active license server that requires only 1 BarTender enterprise license product key code. A backup server relationship requires only 2 servers, each running a license server that hosts its own license, so 2 product key codes. And each of those are fully operational and discrete, so they can operate on their own. They don't have to operate in a Triad type of environment. So this requires a BarTender enterprise license for each of the 2 license servers. A little closer look. So in a Triad specifically, you configure the 3 license servers to act as a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary server. These license servers host the same license, and they share all of the same settings. So they behave as if they were a single license server. You can consider this a license server cluster, so to speak. Each member of the Triad communicates with the other to check if there is an active connection, and also to share and synchronize license server settings and printer user information among the 3. As such, it's vital that there is a consistently operative network connection between all 3 servers. As only 1 license is used to activate a license server Triad, there's no additional licensing cost beyond that of standing up the extra server hardware to run the software. License server Triad's able to survive a loss of one of its nodes without printer licensing to the BarTender clients being affected. So failover is automatic and transparent to the BarTender client user who's initiating the print request. A closer look at backup redundancy. So in a backup redundant relationship, you configure a main license server and a backup license server. These license servers host different licenses, and therefore you must have 2 unique product key codes to activate this type of relationship. You'd set one of the licenses on the license server to act as a main license, and then map that across to a license from a backup license server. The 2 servers are periodically synchronized with each other, so they do act in conjunction, even though they're discrete in nature. The license servers share the same configuration settings. Therefore, the backup can take over the responsibility of the main license server with an up-to-date licensing state when or if failure occurs and redundancy is needed. Backup relationship does not require active connectivity between the 2 servers like the Triad does. Both license servers run independently. If one license server becomes unavailable, the other takes over, as long as the BarTender client can communicate with the backup license server directly. So if it loses connection with the main, as long as it can still connect to the backup, the backup will continue to accept the print requests. One of the benefits of the backup redundancy model is that all changes in one server can be replicated without user intervention to the other server. But if there's no network connectivity between the 2, there's also the offline option to keep these servers in sync. So with a Triad, all 3 servers are in sync via the network connection. With the backup, you still have periodic syncing that's enabled between the main and the backup. But if you did want to operate in an offline fashion, you can do that as well. Oh, one other thing. So one other thing I wanted to mention. So with a backup relationship, you can configure both a partial backup or a full backup. So under partial backup, it's acceptable that the 2 licenses that you have, the one on the main and the one on the backup, have a different number of printers. So while the full backup would have the same number of printers for both licenses. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. So in comparing and choosing which one makes the most sense for your organization, usually customers decide which redundancy relationship to use by evaluating software costs, hardware cost, and network connectivity robustness. So for software cost, Triad relationship only requires one software license, while a backup relationship requires two software licenses. On a hardware cost, a Triad relationship requires 3 servers, while a backup relationship requires only 2 servers. And with network connectivity, a Triad relationship requires a very robust network connection between the 3 servers, while a backup relationship does not. So for those customers who decide a backup relationship will work best for their labeling environment, Siegel Scientific offers discount pricing for the purchase of the additional licensed product key code. So at the time of this webinar it's currently 50% off. You can always contact our sales department for a software quote. Here are the email addresses for the Americas, EMEA, as well as Asia. Okay, so let's go into more detail regarding your options to ensure the highest availability uptime for your BarTender license server. So with a standard license, each BarTender client connects to a license server upon first startup, after each print job is produced, and periodically to ensure that the license server remains available to it. If a license server is not found, a message is given to the user alerting them of the problem, and then proceeds to switch into the 72-hour grace period mode. During the grace period, BarTender printing will be allowed to continue. However, there's effectively a countdown clock running for a period of 72 hours. Connectivity to the license server will need to be reestablished prior to the 72 hours. Otherwise, production printing by the BarTender clients will stop. So this grace period is designed to permit the continuance of BarTender production printing during a time of temporary network or license server failure. And that's been around for quite some time, the 72-hour grace period. It's currently in place, but we're certainly enhancing the capabilities of our backup and redundancy functionality. So with regards to the requirements, what are the requirements for setting up the 2 forms of redundancy relationships? For the Triad relationship, the 3 license servers must be running BarTender 2021 Enterprise Edition or newer. So 2021 is our latest version. Must have good network connectivity between the 3 license servers. They can't already be a part of an existing Triad or backup relationship. They're not under a provisional activation for those using provisional activation to upgrade. And the person setting up the relationship must have permissions to administer all 3 license servers as configured in the user access control rules and admin console. So by comparison, for the backup redundancy relationship, the 2 license servers must be running BarTender 2021 Enterprise Edition. They can't already be a part of an existing Triad or backup redundancy relationship. Again, they can't be under provisional activation, and again, the person setting up the relationship must have the appropriate security level to configure the relationship. So if these requirements are satisfied, then the administrator can go ahead and establish their preferred form of license redundancy. And the decision really comes down to what's the best option for their business needs. So let's go through step by step to create a Triad and a backup relationship. In BarTender 2021, you configure license server redundancy through the use of a setup wizard. You select the redundancy option in the licensing section of the administration console and there's a button where you click the setup server redundancy to begin the wizard for basically creating the relationship. So as you see, this is the relationship selection screen. Once you initiate the wizard, you'll be presented with the choice between the 2 modes of operation to create the backup relationship or the Triad. And as you see, there's quite a bit of detail with regards to what the two options entail, and you would just choose which one made the most sense for your business. Okay, so we've selected which redundancy option that we want. We want to create a triad relationship. Well, what are the steps there? So when creating a triad relationship, we need to identify it with a name. That's screenshot number one. Be sure to use something unique yet self-descriptive so that the triad can be properly identified later. Next, you choose the 3 license servers that are to be added to the triad. That's screenshot number 2. The wizard will automatically detect all of your license servers that it can see on the network automatically. So you'll see a large list there, and you would select the 3 that you wanted as part of the triad. But if for some reason the server that you wanted wasn't listed, then you can click the Add a License Server button that you see there and manually specify the host name or the IP address of the license server to be located. And the only real reason why that would happen is if your license server was on, say, a different subnet or a different network. You would just have to open up those ports and enter in the host name or IP at that time. Then you can connect directly. Each license server needs to be located on a computer that can be directly connected at all times to configure this triad. And the triad would only kick in if one of the servers was down. So then you tick the option of automatic license reactivation after you select those 3 servers that you want on the triad. The license servers will need to be activated in any new role that you create, whether it be backup or triad, or even if you wanted to revert back to a single license server. So anytime you make a change, that you need to automatically restart the license server to take into consideration that new relationship. And the triad specifically won't be operational until it's been properly activated in that way. So that was number 3 screenshot. Roles can then be assigned to each of the 3 license servers in order to determine which server is the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. So that's number 4. And finally, a summary of the selections and configurations will be displayed to the user before the process of actually generating and activating that triad relationship. So you could actually cancel out of this if you wanted to and start over, or you do get that summary page where you can confirm that, yes, this is in fact the relationship that you want to activate for the 3 discrete servers, unique servers. With a triad redundancy relationship created, the user will then see their triad displayed by its name, and you'll see a diagram such as this of the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary license servers, along with their status and the connection state between them. So green is good. Via a menu button that you see on the right, management functions are available to modify the triad roles. You can replace a triad node, swap out a different server, or you can dismiss the triad relationship entirely if you'd like. The license servers maintain regular communication with each other to verify that at least 2 of the 3 servers are running and communicating effectively. So the reason why it's a triad is because you need a quorum to ensure that any one of the servers, 1 or 2 of the servers that are either secondary or tertiary, are up and running. So when the primary connects to either the secondary or tertiary, it becomes the active license server and therefore is the principal node of the triad that processes the BarTender client requests. If, however, the primary fails for whatever reason, it's a network hiccup or the server, the machine itself becomes corrupted, let's say, and is unable to connect to either the secondary or the tertiary, then the triad reports to the BarTender clients that the secondary is now the active license server node of the Triad. When this happens, the secondary will connect to the tertiary to confirm that the tertiary is also unable to connect with the primary. If the connection and confirmation are made, the secondary will then become the active license server and can then process the BarTender client requests. So the secondary, once that happens, the secondary will periodically try to reconnect with the primary. And if it succeeds, it'll then transfer control back to the primary server. So the tertiary's role basically is to satisfy quorum. So single license server nodes in a Triad they don't act alone. They're part of the Triad. If both the primary and the secondary servers become unavailable, then the tertiary server does not process BarTender client print requests. What it will do at that point is to monitor the other servers for availability. So that's the Triad. When a license server node in the Triad fails, the administrator will see in diagrammatic form, such as this, the nature of the failure. As we see in the slide, the secondary license server nodes fail. So that's the red bar between the first and the second server, as well as the second and the third server. The primary is still providing responses to BarTender client print requests as the tertiary is performing its role to satisfy the requirements of quorum. So the tertiary can still connect to the primary. So two of the servers are still communicating with each other. So you're still active in the Triad mode. Okay, so let's go through the steps of actually creating a backup relationship. When creating a backup redundancy relationship, we first need to choose the license servers that will make up the main and the backup. So similar fashion to initially setting up the Triad. To begin, this can be done by selecting license servers that are already online, or by way of importing an offline backup relationship data file that has already been created from the desired license server. So that's screen number one. So one of the benefits of the backup is to be able to do some offline functionality and connections because an active connection between the main and the backup does not need to be active if that's your situation. So next, you choose the license server to perform the role of the main license server, and then which is to be the backup. So that's number 2 and number 3. Select the main, then you select the backup. If the desired license server doesn't appear in the online list, similar to the Triad, you can always specify it by host name or IP address. You have that option in the wizard. So once a license server has been selected for each role, you then do license matching. So there's 2 types of matchings that you can do. You can do a partial backup, where there you have 2 asymmetrical licenses that you want to use. So for example, you might have a 50 printer license for the main server, and then you have a 10 printer license for the backup. In that scenario, when failed over to the partial backup, printer partition configuration takes place. So like I said, with BarTender 2019, you can have, we redesigned the licensing model where you can host multiple licenses on one server. You can partition the licenses into multiple partitions and printer pools. If this is the case and you have that set up, then you will be able to asymmetrically assign those licenses according to the printer partitions that have been configured in that main server. So just as an example, let's say you had that enterprise 50 printer license for the main server, and that 50 printer license had a partition of, say, 10 printers licenses, 15 printer licenses, and 25 printer licenses, which would be the 50. But those were unique printer partitions that you created. If you mapped that 50 printer license to a backup license with let's say an enterprise 10 printer license, So again, you had 50 printers on the main, you had 10 in the backup. You can certainly have that relationship. After synchronization occurs between those two asymmetrical licenses, the Enterprise 10 license on the backup server will be partitioned with 2, 3, and 5 printers respectively. So it's the same ratio of the printer partition that you had for the main server that would be allocated to the backup server, because you had that 50 printer partitioned in a certain way. It would maintain that relationship. But for full backup, meaning you had the same number of printers on both printer licenses on both the main and the backup, that would be full redundancy, meaning there would be a one-to-one relationship of redundancy. So regardless of printer partitions that you had on the main, it would mimic that identically in a one-to-one fashion on the backup. Likewise, if you didn't have any partitions, of course, it would just be a one-to-one backup relationship. So just note that when BarTender clients aren't able to connect to the main server, they will automatically redirect to the BarTender backup license server. No user intervention would be required. Likewise, those clients connected to the backup server will then fail over to the main server if the backup goes offline. And when this happens, when the main server, let's say, resumes operations, the failed over BarTender clients will automatically revert back to the main server. And likewise, if the situation is where the backup server goes offline, the clients that are connected to the backup server failed over to the main will then automatically revert back to the backup server when that server resumes operation. Ultimately, the user will be shown confirmation that the backup redundancy relationship has been established after you've gone through these few steps to actually configure the backup relationship. So once the backup redundancy relationship has been established, the details of the main and backup license server and the nature of their relationship will be displayed in the administration console. So again, green is good. You'll see main server, the green dot, that means it's live and active and able to be connected to. The backup is green and active, it's able to be connected to. And then you see the green arrow connection icon in the middle, which means there is an active connection between the main and the backup. And basically what this means is that any configuration settings that you set in your main server will automatically be replicated to the backup server. So there's quite a few configuration settings available in license server. Things like permissions, license partitions, printer pools. You don't have to duplicate those settings in a backup relationship. They'll automatically be synchronized between the two servers. And the same goes for the Triad as well. Because there is a connection between the three servers in a Triad, those settings will automatically sync once you configure them in the primary server. Also, using the cog that you see on the upper right or the delete button icons, an administrator can always modify or dismiss the redundancy relationship. Okay, so that's it. I'll hand it over to Dennis if you want to facilitate answering any questions that may be had. I know when you're talking about 3 separate servers and then 2 separate servers and failover and going between the two, it can sometimes be a discussion of the famous who's on first skit, but that's basically how it works. If there's any clarification or additional questions, we can take those at this time.
Yep. Yep, indeed, we do have some questions. So, question number one from the attendee. In a backup relationship, it is required for both licenses to be enterprise edition to establish a relationship.
Yes, that's correct. So both licenses are required to be Enterprise Edition, and they also need to be BarTender 2021, of course, because that's where this functionality is included to create the backup or the triad. And a few other requirements. Obviously, it has to be a printer-based license. Um, uh, for the backup, you can have an asymmetrical license. For the triad, it has to have to be the same printer count, because obviously you just have one license. But yes, they both have to be Enterprise Edition and BarTender 2021. So I will say that for the backup relationship, you can have your servers in that relationship host multiple different licenses. Some of which may not need to, won't need to be, or do not need to be BarTender 2021. But of course, at least one of them would need to be BarTender 2021 to establish that relationship.
Okay, next question. Does the Triad relationship support 2, 4, or any number of servers?
No, the Triad server relationship is exactly that, a triad. So you have to configure it the same every time. So you have that, the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. So it has that 3 servers, and that's required for a quorum. And the introduction of a 4th server just would not work in that situation. So yeah, it has to be 3 discrete servers. And of course, the difference between that triad and the backup is that you're only operating off of one product key code. So that network connectivity has to be robust between those 3 triad servers to function.
Okay, question. Do the 3 Triad servers must be in the same subnet?
No, they don't have to be, because if you what I called out, when you go into the wizard to create the triad or the backup for that matter, you can select from the list of servers that you see, and just designate which one is your primary, which one is your secondary, which one is your tertiary. If you do not see the server that you want to connect to in that wizard, you can always specify the IP address of the server that you want to connect to. And that's actually very common, particularly for enterprise customers, because they have multiple different business units, factory locations, those types of things. So each of those locations may be on different subnets, let's say. And if they're on different subnets, you probably would not see the server that you want to connect to in that wizard list. But again, as long as the network is open, the port's open to be able to connect to that IP address, and that machine or that license server, you can just type that IP or the computer name, and you can connect to it.
Okay, next question. In a triad-based WAN, if one of the server location loses its connection, will the servers at the isolate server still keep printing?
And that's for the triad?
Yeah.
Or the backup? Okay, the triad. So the triad, it will keep printing. So how the triad would work is that 2 of the 3 systems would need to be operational and able to connect to each other in order for printing to continue. So that 3rd system, that 3rd server, would its purpose is to monitor the connection between all three servers. So if the primary went down, as an example, the secondary would take over printing um, licensing functionality only if the third server was still able to connect to it. So if in the example of two servers being down and only the tertiary, let's say, is up and running, then that third server would not act as the primary license server in that case. Its function at that point would be to monitor both the primary and the secondary to see when the primary or the secondary becomes active again. And if one of them becomes active, then let's say it was a secondary became active, then the secondary would then start initiating consuming license or handing out licenses. But with that being said, you're certainly not you're certainly still able to print. Just at that point, the 72-hour grace period would kick in. But yes, so two out of the three servers in a triad would need to be able to communicate in order for that triad relationship to continue.
Yeah. Yeah, we still have some questions. Do the triad servers need to be co-located to the BarTender PC that are using it as their primary?
So the question would be, does it have to be in the same co-located, like in the same building on the same PC?
Yeah. Maybe I think we don't have the limitation because all the license server they are communicate with the protocol TCP 5160. So you just make sure all these server can communicate with each other with the protocol, and it's not necessary to be co-located together. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify because you couldn't have it on the same PC. That would be the ultimate co-location. But yes, you can have it on different machines within the same environment, within the same subnet, outside the same subnet. You could have it hosted if you'd like. Like let's say you went with, you had a hosted license server through AWS or Azure, one of those. To your point, Dennis, yes, I mean, you would just need to ensure that the communication was open and in particular, TCP 5160. That's the port that it would operate on.
Next question: what kind of latency is permissionable between triad servers, and how about between backup servers?
Yeah, so we do have some metrics on that. So basically, there's quite a bit of information on that. So, for example, if the client receives a offline notification that the main server went down, it basically takes 1 to 2 seconds for that client request to be routed to the secondary server or the backup server. If it was a backup relationship, and then so it'd be fairly seamless, but the metrics on that at this point are basically 1 to 2 seconds. Couple other metrics that we have: if the main server shuts down unexpectedly, the communication timeout, it would still try to communicate, but for a period of 30 seconds, and then it would completely offload the server load for the primary to the secondary, or from the primary to the main to the backup. But it will, there are periodic instances when you have, say, a network hiccup, or just for a fraction of a second, the network connection is down. So that main server that the client servers will continuously try to reconnect for a period of 30 seconds before the backup completely takes over for the primary. Let's see what else. I think those are the big ones, yeah.
The last question. If network connectivity between BarTender clients and the license server is unstable and liable to failure, which redundancy relationship is recommended?
Yeah, well, that's what it really comes down to. I mean, both options do provide a level of failover and redundancy, but I know in my experience in working with larger enterprise types of customers, they have it's somewhat unrealistic to have all of their business units, subsidiaries, factories across the globe connect to a primary server that's located in somewhere in the US or somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Asia. So they want to spread the load a little bit. And that's primarily a consideration of network instability in one or several of its locations. So if you find that that is the case, that you have a factory that has a historically unreliable network performance, then you would probably want to have a backup relationship. And a lot of it just has to do with peace of mind, because primarily in working with large enterprise, Fortune 500 companies, many of the times it's already in their SLAs, their uptime requirements, that they have a very minimal threshold for downtime. So if that's the case, then you'd certainly want to have a backup relationship, because each of those servers will act in a discrete nature. There is a product key code, a license on the main server, and there is a product key code license on the backup server, and they can each act independently of each other. Whereas a triad, it operates the whole process, and the whole objective is for 3 servers to act as one. With the backup, you have 2 discrete servers that can be synchronized, so that's a benefit, and it can take the load, automatically fail over between the 2 servers. So one scenario that I'll throw out there is, let's say you wanted to share the load between a main server and a backup server in a backup relationship. Let's say you had a 50 printer license on one and a 50 printer license on another. You could certainly connect half of your clients to the main server, connect the other half to the backup server, and then when any failover happens with one of those servers, you're basically sharing the load between the 2, as opposed to just having a 50 printer license on a primary, and then you're always operating. Everyone is always trying to connect to that primary server. So there's lots of different ways that you can address uptime and performance issues, but with a backup relationship, that's certainly the more robust of the 2 when it comes to that.
Congratulations, we have answered all the questions. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, very good.
That is fantastic, you guys. Congratulations. Dennis and Peter, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you attendees for your time and attention. And like I said, everyone will get a copy of the recording, as well as the slide deck and the technical document on license server redundancy. Thank you, and stay safe and stay healthy. Good night, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.